Hey guys, welcome back to That Florida Feeling. This week has not been a good week for me, but I didn't want to take a week off, so I'm just gonna replay one of my most popular episodes. I apologize for not having new content this week. I've had a death in the family, and it's hitting me hard. So yeah, I'll be back next week. I hope you enjoy this. Hey guys, welcome back to That Florida Feeling. I'm really glad you guys decided to join me again this week. I want to thank you guys for all the likes, subscribes, and follows. I'm completely overwhelmed by the support. Thank you for the comments and the encouragement. Everybody who's interacted with the Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. I really appreciate it. You guys, it means a lot to me to know that you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. Thank you for participating in the Instagram polls. It does give me an idea about what people like and don't like and future topics. So thank you. Also, big thank you to Jamie for sending me the Florida story for today. I couldn't pass it up. And I appreciate some other people who've made comments about what we should talk about. I really do appreciate it, and you'll see those in future episodes. Are you guys ready to go on another full tour of Florida? That's right, I said a full tour again. And today, we're not so much going to talk about the sunny side of Florida. We're going to talk about the dark side. No, unfortunately, not all about Star Wars or things you do at night. I'm sure you can figure that one out on your own. A lot of people, when they come to Florida, they make the comment, "Oh, I never want to go back home," or "I never want to leave." Fun fact, some people have stuck around for a long time. That's right. We're going to talk about ghost stories tonight. We're going to talk about the top ones that come out of Florida, because everybody likes a good ghost story, right? I mean, I know I do. I even have a few personal ones from this sunny sunshine state itself. Now, when we think of Florida, a lot of people probably think of either St. Augustine or Ybor City. Those tend to be the two most haunted places that people have heard of in Florida. But there are so many more ghost stories. I found so many more, I couldn't fit them all in this episode tonight. So we're going to talk about some of the ones that I thought were the best tonight, and then we're going to definitely do more episodes on ghost stories from the Sunshine State again. Our first stop tonight is going to be in Key West. I know when most of us think Key West, we think sunny beaches, bars on Duval Street, a relaxed atmosphere, snorkeling, fishing, things like that. But believe me when I say there is a whole other side of Key West. And the part of Key West I'm talking about actually comes from the East Martello Fort Museum. Now, the fort itself is considered a haunted place, but mainly because of Robert the Doll. I know that most people who like to dabble in the paranormal or have researched the paranormal or watched even Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventurers or any of the other shows have probably heard the name Robert the Doll. And I'm going to tell you, having seen him in person, he is absolutely as creepy as he seems. He's on display at the fort. He actually came from a local artist out of Key West named Robert Eugene Otto, or Gene as he was known by his family when he was younger. He was the original owner of the doll, and he received the doll as a present from a servant who was employed by his parents. The doll is absolutely life-size. It's actually pretty big for a kid. And Gene took it everywhere. Him and Robert were inseparable. Gene also had a habit of blaming Robert for doing anything that went wrong. He also he was known to talk to the doll. It was like his best friend. But when he would talk to the doll, people started noticing that they would hear two different voices, like the doll was actually talking back. The family was terrorized by the doll, or so it said. They would find Gene screaming at night with the furniture in his room toppled over, and Gene would be blaming the doll. The doll was seen sitting at the foot of the bed, usually with an evil glare on its face. The streaks of odd occurrences continue to happen with mutilated toys, voices, and other strange things, all that were continued to be blamed on the doll. The doll was eventually moved into the attic when the parents couldn't take the giggling and the tormented toys, or mutilated toys. I guess he tormented the other toys. I don't know. Do toys have a soul? I mean, we have Toy Story. We don't know. But it became too much, and they just couldn't take it anymore, especially after they would see the doll waving at people from the windows. What a creepy thing. You look up and there's a doll waving at you. Ugh, I don't know. I couldn't do it. But they finally took the doll to the attic. They just couldn't take it anymore. They didn't want to deal with it. So it got relegated to the attic. The doll did come out of the attic when Gene inherited the house from his parents, and he decided that Robert needed to go back to his old bedroom. The house changed hands and is eventually, I think it's a bed and breakfast now, if I read that right. And you could actually go and see the bedroom that Robert used to live in. I don't know if I'd want to do that. Is it the doll? Is it the house? Nobody really knows. But the doll was moved to the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, and he's said to be losing his hair color, and that could be connected to his soul the longer he's locked up in the museum. People say that you can also see his facial expressions change while the doll's on display. I didn't see that. I just got a generally creepy feeling from this doll. This doll is just, it looks like it's looking into your soul. It is just weird. But the thing that Robert's actually known for is he's known for placing curses on people who take his picture without asking. In fact, the area where his display is contains letters from visitors asking and pleading forgiveness where they took his picture without permission. The curse is said to include accidents, job losses, divorce, and any other bad thing you could possibly think of that could happen from this doll. He has been investigated by the paranormal groups over the years, and most recently with Zach Baggins on his show Deadly Possessions. Now, whether Robert is a doll that was imbued by voodoo spirits from the servant, or the child blamed it on him and there was just some bad energy that came with it, or from the house, either way, I can assure you this doll is definitely creepy and definitely not something I want in my house. Ever. All right, guys, the next place we're going to stop is the Capitol Theater in Clearwater. Love Clearwater. Absolutely love it. Miss living there. It's a beautiful city, and it has some beautifully old buildings. This is definitely one of them. The theater was built in 1921, and there's 3 ghosts that call this 750-seat theater home. The first one, and the one that's most seen, is called the Captain. He's an old man. He has a blue coat, a goatee, and a fisherman's hat. I couldn't find a backstory on him. I don't know why he got the name Captain. I don't even know who he is. I couldn't find that. I just found out that he's a very naughty ghost. He apparently likes to touch ladies inappropriately and make loud noises at apparently the most inopportune times. So I'm sure he's made his presence known to many people. The second one is Bill Neville. He's either a loved patron of the theater, or he could have possibly been a manager at the theater at one point. I'm sure that there's a record out there that shows if he was a manager, but I was not able to find it. I apologize. However, I can tell you that he was murdered, and his body was found on the balcony. He was said to enjoy the theater and found it to be a most comfortable place. He was beaten and left to die in the theater, and possibly why he never left was because that's the one place he felt safe and at home. I mean, if you want to feel safe and at home for all of eternity, there's probably no better place, especially for him. The third ghost is a little girl. They said to be about 10 years old. Again, could not really find anything on this little girl. I don't know if something happened before the theater or during I don't know. Either way, she's said to be a fun and playful spirit. You can hear her giggling every now and then. The alarms are known to go on and off for no reason at all hours of the night. Orbs have been spotted both in person on video and in photographs. I have walked by this theater numerous times. I did not get a bad vibe from this place, but none of these, spirits really seem like they're bad. Maybe the captain, but maybe he just had a bad day. But either way, it's a really, really beautiful building, and they have some really cool events. You can see a lot of famous people there. So if you're in Clearwater, check it out. You might get an extra surprise that night. So the next stop on our haunted tour, we're going to go a little further south. We're going to go to Miami. And I'm talking about the Miami Biltmore Hotel. When this hotel was built, it became a hangout for notorious mobsters that were either passing through or doing business in Miami. Al Capone was even said to come to the hotel, which is not surprising because he has a house nearby, or did have a house nearby. Maybe he did business there, stayed there while his house was being built. Who knows? Either way, there's definitely reports that he did stay there. And unfortunately, though, his ghost does not haunt this hotel. But it does have a lot of activity, and most of the activity is blamed on a mobster named Fatty Walsh. And I don't know if I'd want to be named Fatty, but all right, man. It's fine. He obviously might not have been that good of a gangster because he was murdered over gambling debts in this hotel. However, Fatty doesn't seem to hold a grudge. He seems to actually be mischievous. He likes to turn lights on and off. He likes to steal lampshades. I don't know if he wears them on his head. Either way, he steals them. He stops elevators on the wrong floors just to mess with people, but he does have a nice charm to him. He is known to hold doors open for servers coming out of the kitchen. I mean, holding a tray of food and struggling with a door, I'm all about somebody holding that open for me. So either way, he's not a malevolent spirit. He seems to be a pretty nice one. The hotel also has a woman in white in their rooms. But I mean, who doesn't have a woman in white or a man in gray? But in this case, it is the woman in white. She's seen floating through the hotel, and she's believed to be a guest who jumped from the tower. Obviously, we don't know why. We couldn't really ask her. But she is seen floating through the hotel. But the hotel being haunted isn't really a surprise if you know the backstory. It was converted into a hospital for soldiers and then a school from the years 1968 to 1987. And then it was converted back into a hotel somewhere around 1987. It does remain one of the most haunted hotels in Florida. I really never guessed. I mean, Miami has a long history, but I never guessed exactly how much of a history it had with the paranormal. But this next place we're going to talk about in Miami seems to be just a hot spot. It's called the Deering Estate. It's actually near Miami. It's in Palmetto Bay, actually. I guess that's kind of part of Miami. The estate features a 1920s stone mansion and had a 3-story cottage that was built in the 1900s. The estate was named for Charles Deering. He was somewhat of a philanthropist and kind of helped create part of Florida. He built this place so he could have friends and colleagues, namely Henry Flagler. I'm sure if you've been to Florida, you've heard about him. He'll come up again. But he built the home, which was actually, I think, a hotel at first, I read. And it was to entertain his guests so that they could come south to Florida and make it their own playground. The estate itself is said to be built on tribal burial grounds, which, if you know anything about tribal burial grounds, you probably don't want to build anything on it. It's actually the Cutler Burial Mound that's on the estate, and it's one of the few surviving in that area. The grounds are also said to have a fossil deposit that was found when a sinkhole opened up in 1979. The hurricane has also survived numerous attacks from Mother Nature, including Hurricane Andrew. Unfortunately, the stone house still bears the watermarks from how flooded the estate got, and the original cottage was basically disintegrated into matchsticks. But it has since rebuilt, so you can see a replica of it if you go to these grounds. The grounds are said to be very active, very. I've seen, when I was researching this, you could see a lot of cool pictures and stuff from it. I mean, everybody seems to catch something. Recordings seem to be a big thing there too. You can catch the EVPs. A couple of them say, "Come home, send me, I'll go," things like that. It's just generally a creepy place, apparently. They do also think that Deering himself still roams the grounds. Apparently, he was so in love with the estate that he just didn't want to leave. You can also see women out of the roaring 20s roaming the grounds, probably still looking for a party to get in on. Although I can't say I'm really surprised about this place being haunted. Someone who, I guess, either owned it or had access to where the estate is now actually dug up part of the burial mound, looking for the lost treasure of Black Caesar, who was an African pirate, before Deering even bought the land. And when he bought the land, he bought the artifacts, which we all know that means skeletons, back, and I guess put them back in the ground or put them back on the land. But that's still just some bad juju. You let the dead lie where they lie. We're not going to go dig up things. Ugh. So you can kind of see why this place might be a hot spot, just from all the bad stuff that's happened to it. It's so bad, though, that there's actually an official ghost tour put on by the Florida Historical Society. All right, think about that. The Florida Historical Society is a government-run group, and now a government-run ghost tour. I mean, you can't deny what's going on if the government has even accepted that this is true and let people tour the building with a ghost tour. It has been investigated by major ghost hunters and teams, and apparently there's always still teams combing around for evidence. Apparently there's no shortage of it. They say that they still feel presences, hear voices, see shadows, and catch evidence, especially on the security cameras. There is a super creepy photo from the security camera of I'm going to say it's a man. Either way, it looks very, not like something you'd want to run into, especially not in the middle of the night. They have tried to have sleepovers and studies done at the estate overnight, and they all end up being failures because people end up bolting halfway through the middle of the night. But I think camping out on a burial ground that got disturbed is going to go about as well as you think, which is not well at all. So if you're ever in Miami, check it out. It's actually on my bucket list now. I didn't really know about this place until I was doing research. The next place is a little more north, though, and it's actually a very famous place. It's in Cape Canaveral, so home of NASA. The place we're going to talk about is the launch pad for Apollo 1. It's the scene of a horrific event in NASA's history. And the pad is actually called Launch Complex 34. And has been abandoned for quite a while. The only thing still standing out there is a concrete launch platform, which is a huge concrete structure, some rusted steel, a barren windswept land, and a plaque to commemorate the astronauts who did not make it. The launch complex was where Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger, I think it's Chaffee, died when a flash fire hit the capsule of Apollo 1 in 1967. They didn't make it out alive. They were trapped. And this was just 2 weeks before their official launch up into space. The people who still visit the site have reported hearing screams near the structures, of feelings of dread, fear, and sadness. They've also seen apparitions and orbs. All this has led NASA to stop visitors due to what they've called strange occurrences. Now, NASA hasn't come out and said it's haunted, but the remains of the site, the stories that are still there, some of the pictures, and the fact that it's closed due to strange occurrences probably leads to the fact that there's definitely something going on out there. They probably just won't say it's haunted. So the next part we're going to talk about, it's not a place, it's a zone. And some of you may have heard about this. It's a specific zone through Florida. It's actually called the Dead Zone, and it's on Interstate 4, and it's been known for all of its strange occurrences. Now, I'm going to call it I-4, as it's known in Florida, locals. And that's the nicest name I'm going to call it, because most of us who've driven it know exactly how much fun it can be to just sit there. I-4 actually stretches from Daytona, goes through Orlando, takes you right past Disney World, and ends up in Tampa. It connects basically 95 to 75. So if you've ever driven through Florida and been to Disney World, you were definitely on I-4. And you might have even passed through the Dead Zone and did or didn't realize it. The actual Dead Zone itself is just a quarter-mile stretch through Seminole County. So it's right north of Orlando if you're coming in. It's just over the St. Johns River. And it's known as the deadliest and scariest stretch of I-4, which is amazing because I-4 is pretty long and this is just a quarter-mile stretch. The road is said to get its activity from a settlement that used to be there years ago. It was called the St. Joseph Settlement. And it was right on the banks of the St. Johns River. And the town or settlement was essentially wiped out from yellow fever. The graves were put into we're in a graveyard, or it's now called the Field of the Dead. They believe the people that are actually the most upset is a German family that died there in 1886. It was 2 adults and 2 children. They all died of yellow fever. And they were buried in this Field of the Dead. Things would happen around town, but everybody that lived nearby knew not to mess with this. And they warned others that were coming in and buying land, hey, you don't need to mess with these graves, don't mess with the field, just let it lie where it lies. There's even a story of a farmer who moved 2 of the headstones and his barn burned down. I don't know if that's coincidence, really bad coincidence, or something is going on. The settlement became what is now modern-day Sanford, so you can still see the area if you've ever been near Orlando and heard of Sanford. But the reason that I-4 is there is because when they were building I-4, they were buying up land left and right, and they bought this patch of land, the Field of the Dead, and they had marked the graves for relocation. Now, I don't know if it was mismanagement, laziness, stupidity, somebody didn't take it seriously. Either way, the graves were never moved, and the road was built right on top of them. And ever since then, this little stretch has been plagued by strange weather, apparitions, deadly wrecks, phantom truckers, weird radio signals, hitchhikers that exist but don't exist, and just horrible traffic. People also attribute the Dead Zone to the strange path of Hurricane Donna in the 1960s. I didn't know about this, so I had to look up Hurricane Donna. Apparently, she was a beast of a hurricane. And she hit the Keys, came on shore at Goodland, curved right over the Dead Zone, so straight up I-4, and then went back out to sea near Daytona. People have also been picking up weird voices on their cell phones, their CB radios, their statics. Truckers have a lot of problems with their CB radios of hearing weird static or conversations that don't exist. Drop phone calls, other wrecks, phantom truckers that actually seem like they're going to run over people, and other weird activities in this stretch of road. I have driven this road numerous times, all hours of the day. I have driven from Orlando to Jacksonville many times, and from Jacksonville to Tampa. You have to go over this part. And I can say I've never experienced anything out of the ordinary, or if I did, I didn't notice it. I certainly didn't experience a phantom truck. I'm not saying it's not real. I just haven't experienced it. If you guys have experienced it, let me know. I would love to hear a personal experience about this. I found a lot of reports about it, but not a lot of like personal, like, hey, this really happened to me things. So I'd love to hear about it. The next place that we're going to visit, and it sticks out to me because this building is just beautiful, and I'm talking about the Vinoy Renaissance in St. Pete. Apparently, the hotel has been plagued with numerous stories of activities, and a lot of them come from the baseball players that stay there, because if you play the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, they're actually located in St. Pete, not Tampa. Surprise, surprise. And a lot of the players get put up in the hotel, and they have a ton of stories about this place. I've only seen it from the outside, and it is absolutely gorgeous. The hotel was built in 1925, and it was open seasonally just from December to March. That's really when the snowbirds were. Now it feels like it's year-round. The hotel became a popular place for all the celebrities of the time that include Babe Ruth, James Stewart, Herbert Hoover, and Calvin Coolidge. The hotel lasted until World War II, when it was taken over for a training school, and then it just never really kind of recovered after that. It fell into some hard times. It was bought in the 1990s by the Renaissance Hotel and Resorts, and then it was reopened 2005 to what it is today. And it still stands to be a number one hotel in the area. It's filled with amenities, luxuries. It's absolutely beautiful. But now it has some unexpected experiences with the ghost. But the ghosts don't seem to be too bad. They all seem to be fun, pleasant. They just can scare you if you're not expecting it. There's so many stories out there for Major League Baseball players. I picked a couple. In 2003, the Marlins pitcher Scott Ryan had his encounter when he was trying to sleep. He told people that he felt like he was being watched, that someone laid on the bed with him, and he noticed a man in a coat near the curtains. He's not really the only one in that time period. A strength coordinator from the Pirates around the same time told people that he was seeing a transparent male in his room near the desk that would just appear and reappear. There's numerous sightings of a man in a formal suit walking up and down the hall. We don't know if he worked there or if he's just a party goer that just never left because he had so much fun. A lot of guests also report the water turning on and off, the lights flickering on and off at night, footsteps that belong to no one, conversations in the hallways where no one's standing there, and the sound of chains. I'm sorry, the sound of chains when I think of old horror stories, the chains in the wall. Sorry, okay, sound of chains. Anyways, I couldn't find any information as to who the ghosts were, none, and I looked at a lot of things. I don't know if the ghosts come from the party days of the hotel, which kind of seems like it if there's a man in formal clothing, or if it's from the training school, or if some people got in there when the hotel wasn't a hotel and, bad things happen. But it seems like whatever's sticking around at the Vinoy, they all just want to have fun with its current guest. The next place is we're not too far from the Vinoy. It's actually in Tampa. It's in Ybor City. Ybor, Y-B-O-R, Ybor City. And it's the historic part of Tampa. And the part I'm talking about, if you've ever been over there, it's pretty famous, is the Cuban Club. The club was actually built in 1916, and it was brought about by the migration of all the Cubans to the area. They were known for their hand-rolled cigars and arts and crafts. The club was originally destroyed about a year after it was built by a fire, but the members rallied together and rebuilt the second one on the same site. You can see the second one today. It's an absolutely beautiful building as well. The Cuban Club does have some known deaths in it, especially spanning from the 1920s. The first was an actor who committed suicide on stage. He apparently forgot his lines, was so distraught he just couldn't take it anymore. Now, I couldn't find if this was during a actual live play or if he was just in rehearsal. Either way, I'm sure that is a shock that none of them forgot. And just remember, guys, if something like that's going on to you, it's not as bad as you think. There's always going to be better days. And if you need help, please reach out to somebody. Another death that occurred was actually a member of the board. And he was found murdered as a result of an argument with another member. They apparently fought. He died, and his ghost still roams the building. It's said that the other member also roams the building, probably in search of forgiveness that he'll never have. They're not the only ones, though. There's also a child ghost, which I think child ghosts are the saddest to me. Little Jimmy, that's his name. He is said to roam the club after drowning in a swimming pool that was on site when the club first opened, or the second building opened. He's apparently a playful spirit that likes to communicate with you through flashlights. So I guess if you turn the flashlight on or off, he'll do the opposite. He's also been seen in the windows waving at people after the club closes at night. I can only imagine some of the phone calls. There's a child locked in the building, only to find nobody's there. They also have reports of a ghostly woman in white with red heels, and it definitely specified red heels, who tends to go up and down a set of steps. The piano can be heard playing by itself, probably from a party that it never finished. And there's a woman that can be heard wailing in the building. I couldn't find anything about why there'd be a woman wailing. Either way, that's probably got to be the creepiest sound ever. You can see orbs and other sightings of the apparitions, hear noises. And the club has been investigated by most paranormal groups. I think it was TAPS that they said that named it Club Dead. And it is definitely one of the most haunted places, especially since it was named Most Haunted by Travel Magazine. Now, the club is still open today, and they do host events. They just had a pop-up event in the beginning of June, which I'm kind of sad about. I would love to have gone to this, but it was a haunted tavern event where they talked about the different cocktails and the club's history. I think that would have been fascinating. Either way, they're continuing on with their history and definitely embracing it. Still with me, guys? Because now we're going to cross to the other side of the state. And we're going to stop off in Stuart, Florida. We're going to talk about Gilbert's House of Refuge. I did not know what a house of refuge was. It's okay if you don't. I had to Google it. The house is actually a building that was they built a bunch of them along the coast of Florida. And they were built to help sailors who got stranded by shipwrecks, because the Florida coast is notorious for shipwrecks. I mean, there's even a treasure coast, which is where Stuart's located. It's between Daytona and West Palm. So it's in that stretch with like Vero and stuff. But they built houses of refuge, and they were built by the U.S. Life Saving Services. They were run by a housekeeper and their wife. They were paid handsomely for that day. The bottom floor was more of a common area, their living quarters, a kitchen. The top floor was a dormitory type setting where the sailors could live, recuperate, get food, get shelter until they were well enough to go to either back on another ship on port or find another city that they wanted to live in. The one that's odd about the Stuart, though, is that this one was built 120 miles from the nearest town. So I'm sure these sailors stayed more than a day. The house was built in 1876. It closed somewhere between 1915 and 1945. I read reports, and there was it conflicted between the two of those. So either way, it was closed in that 30-year span. It did say 44 people the time it was open. It's actually a charming building, if you ever get to go see it. It's known to have a few different haunts, though. There's an old sailor seen sitting on the rocks outside the house staring at the sea, probably looking for the ship he lost. But when he goes into the house, he apparently gets a little possessive, and people have heard, "Get out." Apparently he doesn't want people roaming around. So that could be a little scary if you're not expecting it. People have also reported smelling food cooking in the house, even though the kitchen hasn't operated in over 80 years. The smell of pipe smoke, hearing phantom footsteps, objects moving. And there's a report of a mirror that keeps reappearing in the house, even though it's not been there in years. The creepiest spirit in this house, though, to me, that I found a couple different reports on, possibly comes from when Indians lived on the land. And there's an apparition that comes around and refuses to leave. It's a man dressed in what is looked to be like a fur tunic. It was fur or fur-like in the description, with woven leggings and gloves, and he's holding a mask over his face with looks to be made of bone. It's got a downward turned mouth, much like a growl, and the eyes are just two soulless dots. It can be very unnerving, and it's usually accompanied by the distant sound of chants or drums. I think if I saw that, I'd be noping out of there. That is just not what I signed up for. But if you ever get the chance to go, I think it's really cool. It's a historical site, especially as a house of refuge, since it's really the only one still around. You can kind of see what we did for sailors back in the day, to make sure that people were okay, because that is a really rough area, especially when hurricanes are around. All right, guys, couple more stops, promise. Our next stop on our whirlwind haunted tour of Florida is actually going to be in Pensacola. And we're going to talk about the Pensacola Lighthouse. The lighthouse is said to be very haunted. It has sat at the entrance of the bay for over 160 years. They don't really if you talk to an employee there, they not so much call it haunted. They just say that they prefer to say that six people who stuck around for eternity to help them out with their daily duties. I think that's a better way to look at it than, oh, it's haunted. No, we just have long-term employees. The first lighthouse was actually built in 1824, and it was first lit on December 24th, 1824. And it stood at the entrance of the bay until there were complaints that it could not be seen over the trees of Santa Rosa Island. So it wasn't tall enough, I guess, for the area. So what did they do? They rebuilt it. They rebuilt it and finished it in 1859, and that's the one that stands today. Now, the lighthouse has had a couple different interesting encounters in its history. It did stand during the Civil War, and it was a Southern occupation. It was taken over by the North. It has been struck by numerous lightning strikes, the worst in 1874, and it even survived a rare Florida earthquake in 1886. Not gonna lie, did not know that Florida had earthquakes until I was reading about this. It does have a keeper's quarters. The keeper's quarters have also been redone due to the numerous weather events, the hurricanes, cracks, and many other attempts by Mother Nature. And I don't know if Mother Nature adds to the fact that it's a hot spot, but it does have a long history, and I can definitely see why it's haunted. Now let's start with the keeper's house. The keeper's house had I guess it was the original lighthouse. When I read it, it seemed like it was the original lightkeeper from the rebuilt lighthouse. I think I explained that wrong. So when they rebuilt the lighthouse, this was the first lightkeeper, is what it sounded like. And he was supposedly murdered by his wife. Then there was another lightkeeper's wife, Ellen Murrell, and she passed away in 1911 while giving birth. Those are the two main things that happened in the keeper's house. So let's talk about the original lightkeeper. He was Jeremiah Ingram, and his wife was Michaela. They both took immaculate care of the lighthouse. In fact, Michaela's much more than Jeremiah, and this was known to have caused fights between them. They were known to have a bit of a volatile marriage, and finally, it was found that Jeremiah was stabbed. Now, Michaela claims he was stabbed by an intruder, and when asked why she didn't fight back, she claims she hid because she felt that Jeremiah had the intruder at bay. I don't know. Even if there was an intruder, that just seems like you don't do that, you know? You gotta help people. But anyways, most people didn't believe it, but they couldn't prove it, right? Because she just took over the lighthouse. Everything was keep on going. Nobody really thought anything of it. There was just rumors around town that she probably did kill Jeremiah. Well, when they did renovations in the keeper's house, they pulled up all the flooring and the carpet, and they found a large blood stain on the original wood floors with trails going into the other rooms. So who knows? I mean, if he did get stabbed by an intruder, it would cause that. But kind of leaning towards Michaela. You can still hear furniture moving, laughter, doors opening and closing while in the house. The basement of the actual house is another hot spot. You can communicate with spirits who are said to be named Thomas and Raymond. They are runaway slaves who were hanged and buried on the property. They're known to touch people and make themselves seen. So the basement also apparently has a generally unsettling feeling about it from all the reports I've read. There were also children who died on the property in 1922, the yellow fever, and they're active. You can see or hear them running through the house, especially when large tour groups are around. Now, the most activity, though, is actually in the tower itself. The former keeper, Sam Lawrence, is still seen doing his daily duties all these years later. He's been known to move pails to help people. You can hear breathing in the lantern room when no one's with you, and footsteps coming up and down the tower, even when no one else is around. That's also definitely on my bucket list. It just sounds like an interesting place. Now, next to last stop on our tour is actually in Marianna. It's in Jackson County, Florida, which is in North Florida. And the location of our haunted stop is actually the Bellamy Bridge. So the bridge was built in 1914 on a historic trail. It's the oldest structure of its type in the state and the largest at its time, and it holds a spectacular legend. The legend revolves around the trail actually leading up to the bridge, and it includes a 19th century murder of a moonshiner, which I really couldn't find any info about this other than that there was a murder. I don't know who did it. I don't know who it was, but apparently there was a known murder on this trail. The other part of the legend is a wooden wagon driven by a headless driver. Don't know who, don't know where they came from, don't know where they're going. I mean, obviously they're going down the trail, but I couldn't find much else other than that there's reportings of this. But the reason the bridge is known as a ghost bridge is thanks to a woman named Elizabeth Jane Bellamy, or the famous ghost of the Bellamy Bridge. The legend goes that Elizabeth died in 1837 near her home, or her estate, near the bridge. And she's a restless spirit that roams the bridge, and her apparition actually dates back from sightings from the 1800s. She was the wife of a political leader and was buried in a family cemetery not far from the bridge. Now, Elizabeth had everything going for her. She fell in love with Samuel Bellamy. They were going to have a happy family, this beautiful estate. But tragedy struck hours after her wedding. She was dancing or lounging. You can read the story. It's been told as both. Either way, her dress came in contact with a candle. Now, back then, the dresses were very flammable and very thick. They had a lot of layers. And she burst into flames. She ran from the house screaming before a guest or her new husband could really do anything. She was badly injured and succumbed to her injuries a few days later. She was laid to rest by her husband and her family on the banks of the Chipola River, but they say that the grave was unable to hold her. She had so much love for her husband that she refused to stay in the grave and began appearing on the banks of the river and the bridge looking for him. Again, the lady in white. Now, while this legend is a good one, and Elizabeth is absolutely a real person, she didn't die from a fire. She actually died from yellow fever after living with her husband and having a small son. She is buried in a grave on the banks of the river, and her son was buried next to her after passing away with yellow fever as well. Now, the story of Elizabeth may be embellished a bit, but the fact that there is a woman in white and the ghost roams the bridge area is absolutely true. People have also reported seeing fireballs shooting out of the ground, orbs, and a figure roaming the area. Some say the woman in white, some say a figure. Now, the legend itself might not be accurate, but people seeing it cannot be debated, especially since there's numerous sightings from the 1800s. I'm not sure if I think it's Elizabeth, because she seemed like she didn't lose her husband. Her son was alive when she died. I'm more wondering if it's not her husband who was said to have mourned her all of his life. I'm not wondering if it's not him still looking for her. All right, guys, you still with me? Last stop on the tour. And for our last stop, we're going to go to the notoriously haunted St. Augustine. And if you've ever been to St. Augustine, you know that they have signs for ghost tours. You've heard whispers around town that every building is haunted, or you've even been lucky enough to experience it yourself. I live in St. Augustine, and I'm here to tell you it is absolutely haunted. Ask anybody here. Me and all my coworkers, we have stories from the building we work in. We have stories from just the places we've been in town, just walking down the streets. You see and hear things. Something floats out of the corner of your eye. You turn and there's nothing there. But you know you're not alone. You can't set foot in St. Augustine without stepping on someone, even if you don't realize it. And yes, we are going to have an episode on St. Augustine later. I have so many stories from myself and my friends and just all the historical facts from the city. But I picked my favorite ghost story from the ancient city. And my favorite story comes from what is now known as Casablanca Inn on the Bay. It's a hotel that also has a restaurant and a bar in it. This place is absolutely gorgeous. The Teeny Martini Bar has some amazing drinks. The restaurant's not bad itself. But if you're ever in St. Augustine, definitely stay there. It's right on the bay. You can see the Matanzas. You can see the Bridge of Lions. It's just a beautiful place. Back to the story. The house was actually owned by a widow, and we're talking this is the 1920s when this story took place. She was a widow. She needed money, so she opened her house as a boarding house because that's what people did back then. She was known for being friendly, clean, hospitable, on the cheaper end. She needed to make some money, and this is how she did it. But she continued to suffer financially. It's the 1920s, the Great Depression. We're heading towards it. Florida's wasn't spared by it either. So to make more money, she started to look around, and she realized that she could help rum runners, because this is the Prohibition time, so alcohol's not legal. And she had what's called a widow's walk on her second story. So When rum runners would come into town and she knew that the agents were in town, she would stand in her second story and she would wave her lantern to warn them away from the ports. And when they didn't see her, they'd run in, drop their supplies, and leave. Now, she didn't just warn them, she also boarded them at her house. She actually got in with some of the Captain Morgans from Cuba and kept a certain clientele list where that she knew she could make money from. She actually made a pretty substantial amount of money from helping rum runners. But you can still see her. You can still see the lantern in the second story window warning people. Now, I don't know if she's warning that the city's too full of tourists, that bad storms are coming, or she's just still doing her job all these years later because she still wants to make money. Either way, if you get the chance to walk by the inn, you definitely should stay there even. It's gorgeous. But if you feel that you're not alone, you're not wrong. When we were there, we had the feeling that someone was always right around the corner. We saw glasses moving on the bar, and I'm not saying they hit a patch of water and they slid. No, these things picked up and moved. We could hear footsteps out by our room, and nobody was out there. There's also the report of hearing children running around the house. I've never really seen a lot of children stay here, so I'm sure that would creep me out if we had that experience. You can still see the lantern in the window, and there's an old woman that is seen to walk the halls of the house and disappear into nothing. You can smell oranges all over the property, and there's a mist or fog that is known to float around the property. Either way, she just doesn't want to give up her house, and I don't blame her. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I'm sure she loved it there since she didn't give up and she found a way to stay and support herself. And that's just one of the many stories out of St. Augustine. Now, we can't conclude our ghost tour without a Florida story. It's not Florida Man this time. It's actually about a whole town. Unfortunately, it's not a haunted story, but it's a really funny one. We're going to talk about Brooksville. Brooksville is a little town north of Tampa, and they sold their water tower. Yep, just sold it. I believe the man paid $55,000 for the water tower. Now, they didn't mean to sell their water tower, but they did. The guy who bought it went to get the deed to his new property to get the address and found that he had bought the water tower. The city had made some oversight, forgot to split the deed to the land. The man was nice enough to deed it back to the town, although he did own it for probably a couple days. But way to go, Brooksville. Nice catching that on the deed. Way to make us look smart here in Florida. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed your haunted tour. I hope you heard some ghost stories you didn't know about, and it might make you want to visit a new place in Florida. I have so many more that we're going to have definitely more episodes on Haunted Florida, as well as Haunted St. Augustine and even Ybor City. But let me know which one your favorite was. Tell me one I didn't mention, and I'll add it to the next time. Also, don't forget to send me your favorite Florida story so we can do a listener's episode. The email address is thatfloridafeel@gmail.com. Any suggestions or comments are also welcome. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. I hope you guys have a great week. And, of course, that's your daily dose of sunshine.